A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
Our special guest today writes Christian fiction books. And some of us love reading non-fiction, and others of us love to devour a good novel with a cleverly imagined storyline. Well, our guest today draws on the deep wells of her own journey to salvation and aligning with Christ in her books. She's not only an author, but also a Christian counsellor and psychotherapist who draws on her own struggles as well as the deep and wide scenarios that have emerged from a long career as a Christian counsellor. Brenda Stevensen wrote the books Vortex and Georgia. With a couple of new books that are close to release, Brenda spent 24 years as a clinical counsellor. She's registered with the Christian Counsellors Association of Australia, Psychology Today Online and Chaplaincy Australia. Brenda, a special welcome along to 2020.
Oh, well, thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Hey, Brenda, you're a fiction writer.
Yes.
And you think that somehow or other, when you're writing fiction, there's some doubt maybe over the value of the content, and Christian bookstores are sometimes reluctant to stock books by Christian authors of fiction books. Is that something you've discovered?
Not so much the Christian, because Coorong, of course, stocks Christian books. It's more that Australian authors. That's my concern. I read a lot of books, and I've read a lot of books for years, my whole life, and I probably should have shares in Coorong for the amount of money I've spent there.
Yes.
But all the fiction novels that I read are all by American authors, except one Australian author in the historical romance side, but she really writes more like an American author. And so it's just an Australian author with Australian bent in their stories that I don't find.
Okay. Is there something of a stigma, you think, that might be attached to Australian authors? Because, just reflecting on the fact that, at one point in time, if it was an Australian movie, we wouldn't go and see it because it wasn't American. Those sorts of things. Is there something with an Australian author that maybe, thinks that it's not going to have a wide appeal?
Well, from what I've learned, what I know, because, I don't know everything about this, but what I have discovered is that the biggest publishers for Christian novels and any kind of books really are in America. Now, what I've learned is that generally American readers want to read about stories set in America by Americans. And the agents and publishers don't want to publish outside of that because you don't live there. So you can't go on book writing, book signings and all those things. It's really difficult. So there's a lot in that. To me, they're a lot more insular in that way. Now, unless you're a J.K. Rowling, for example, to really break through that, it's very difficult. And I don't want to write her kind of books to get there.
No, in actual fact, sometimes if you say, well, I'm a Christian and I'm an author, the sort of subject matter that you might actually choose to write about, it varies, doesn't it? So you wouldn't be writing a Harry Potter. You'd be writing something that, has an appeal to an audience where you can actually interweave your own story into it.
Yes, that's right. Well, for me, I didn't plan on any particular genre, and in fact, I don't write under one genre. I don't even fit in a genre exactly. My books are God-led, and God has given me the idea, particularly for the third book. It was very much His idea, and He's guided me through that one. But He's guided me through all of them. And so what was my train of thought? And I've lost my train of thought. What was it?
That's all right, because when you are a Christian and you are working as a Christian counsellor in psychotherapy, which helps people get the behaviours of their life and the sorting out of their family, all those sorts of good things, and you're also an author, putting all those things together creates the sort of scenarios that you're going to write about, because undoubtedly with a long, long career that you've had as a counsellor, you've come across a lot of scenarios, and while you wouldn't be able to use names and such things, all sorts of things that have all sorts of problems that you discover, they actually are met with good resolution of some good solutions for people.
Yes. So where I lost my train of thought was I was going to say that I've drawn on all of those experiences plus my own life journey, but it's God inspired, let's say, and that's very different to coming up with a storyline that fits a genre that meets requirements that gets the money, let's say.
All right, so a little bit about you. We've discussed your Christian counselling role and that you, in fact, what I'm hearing is that you wait on the Lord and what He's downloading into your heart and mind is what you want to be able to write about. So the sorts of books that you have written, the Vortex book, the Georgia book, let's talk about those, maybe one by one. Vortex is the one that all about a young woman named Hope.
Yes, that's actually my journey, fictionalised, but greatly fictionalised. It was when I wrote it to protect my daughter because it's about ritual abuse.
Okay, all right. Now we're going to begin to deep end conversation here, and you share what you can.
Yeah.
But when you've gone through these sorts of things, the journey out of those and understanding how to leave those elements of your life behind, actually writing your story can be somewhat cathartic. It's like a therapeutic thing to write the story. So what do? You almost take a third-person approach, and you're writing about a character, and most of that character is you.
Yes, I actually started it as an autobiography, but then I realised I don't have a platform. I'm not well known, and so I put it in a drawer, and then I was told by a friend prophetically that God wanted me to put into fiction. Well, I rejected that at first and said, no way, I can't write fiction. So I stuck it in the drawer, left it there for 8 years, something like that. Then I thought, maybe God's right. And so I picked it up and I reworked it all. Partly, as I said, I changed a lot of details to protect my daughter and myself, but also to write it in a way that I hoped that people would be able to read it, relate to it. Yeah, there are some really dark bits in it because it's about the ritual abuse, and so I made it very real of my real experiences, but I've woven a lot. But through that journey is always that sense of, in that story there's an angel who helps Hope. And then she also meets a family who look after her and protect her. They're Christians, and then she goes through her own therapy and ministry, because that's a very big part of it too, in order to get healing and wholeness, as much as anyone can.
Are the best books written by people who've had like a dark side of an experience rather than just the light side? I mean, who wants to read about just light things? Sometimes we're attracted to the fact that I'm going to identify with some of those things you're going to write about. And are the best books, do you think? Is this because sometimes we can say, well, where do those thoughts come from? Where does the story plot come from for a story like that? And do you find that even you must be widely read too on a whole lot of books of similar sorts of genres? Is this where the best books come from because someone's gone through some dreadful experiences?
I don't think people have to go through dreadful experiences, but they say write what you know. And I think drawing on your own experiences to write fiction makes a difference, because then you're speaking in a real way, real emotion, real struggles. And that kind of comes through. It doesn't have to be dark and heavy. I don't necessarily think the best books, they are the best books, or the light ones are the best books. I think it's just what speaks to someone, what appeals to someone. Sometimes you need a light book. Sometimes you need a book that makes you laugh, things like that. And I think that's really helpful.
Different horses for different courses. People are going to pick up all sorts of books. But, when you've written Vortex, you say, so how could Hope ever be free from this hell on earth?
Yes.
Now, hell on earth is pretty strong.
Yeah.
And that's a reflection of your own background.
Oh, yes. I spent a lot of years struggling to get to where I am today. I suppose I should go back a step and just say I didn't become a Christian until I was about 33, and my daughter was only about 3. So up until that point in time, I was doing life in my own strength, in my own way, and I actually had no memories at all of what I'd experienced. It was all completely blocked out.
How much can you take us into? I guess if you were reading the book Vortex, you'd probably get an embellished understanding of how this happened in your early life. But when you talk about things like hell on earth, what is the Brenda story that we might understand and appreciate that you've worked through and you've discovered that there are some tunnels where there is a light, and that light might be in Christ? Yeah.
So not an easy question to answer simply because it's such a convoluted journey, you know, with like God kept bringing Christians into my life and I kept rejecting it, and I was trying to sort of just get through life. And, you know, there was, how can I say it? It was like, I just felt so messed up in my head, and I was a very dysfunctional person, you know. I was very reactive to things, and I just didn't have any sense of hope. It was just really surviving, getting through day by day, year by year, but still functioning okay, you know, working and things, but never being really happy, knowing there was something else beyond me, but not really sure what that was. And yet when God brought a Christian into my life, I kept rejecting that and pushing that away. And so in that is just all those, you know, that anguish emotionally, you know, mentally, you just know that you're not normal somehow, but there's just so much of this trauma that I was carrying that it was a heavy burden. And I'm not sure if that's quite answering your question.
If you are a victim of ritual abuse, there must be an abuser. And
Yes.
I know listeners will have caught the reason why you've written under a nom de plume, under a different pseudonym, a different name, is because you wanted to protect your own family. But what can you share about the sort of ritual abuse that you were suffering?
Ooh, okay, because I don't want to upset people, but look, these are satanic cults. So you've got Freemasonry, you've got witches, covens, you have all variations of all of these things, and they overlap. There's a lot of similarities, they overlap, but they're also so separate. But they share the children. So when they grab a child and they bring them in, and they're basically like brainwash them. We call mind control programming them in order to continue this process. So they're meant to grow up, they're meant to do these evil things, and they're meant to bring their children and do to them and keep the whole thing going. And this has been going on for many, many decades. My parents weren't strictly involved, but they allowed, let's say, somebody to come into my life who secretly was taking me off at night, and I was being put through a whole lot of what we would call torture. So rape and torture, basically. But there's a lot of demonic stuff in that. I hope this is something I can say here.
Yep.
There was actually demonic healing. So they'd do things to a person and then they demonically heal them. So they actually amazingly came out looking like nothing had happened physically to them. So this is going to sound really crazy and weird to a lot of people who've never heard this sort of stuff before, but this is what happens and it's still happening. So I was put through, let's say, a very extensive brainwashing process, if that makes it simpler, because I was meant to become one of them. And they chose me for a particular position, let's say, in their cult, although I never found that out, what that was, because God got me out of it by the time I was about 9. And however, they kept tracking me for a long time, kept watching me. They let me know they were watching me. They knew where I was for years. And it was terrifying. And that was part of the hell on earth, is knowing that terror all the time of knowing that they could find me. And they always let me know they knew where I was, and with my daughter and that sort of thing. Until I got really completely free of it, then it stopped. Then they had nothing to hook back to me to try and get me back in.
So we're talking about a cult's mind control that wanted to dominate your life.
Yes.
There was a ritual abuse that was going on.
Yeah.
And getting free from that was a really big challenge. And
Yes.
you've been able to reflect on those things
Yes.
in a book. And I know listeners will say, well, that's why you're writing with a nom de plume, because some of the things that you talk about, separating those from your own name might actually be really valuable.
Visions 2020 with Neil Johnson. A biblical perspective on life, culture, and current events.
And our special guest this hour is Brenda Stevensen. Brenda is an author. Now, here's an author who writes fiction books. She's a Christian. She's been a Christian counsellor for a long time. But what we've discovered is that Brenda came from a very, very dark experience in her past, experiencing ritual abuse. And so in order to write about her story, she was reluctant to put her own name to that. And so, Brenda, when we talk about having a nom de plume, and there's all sorts of reasons why an author might choose not to use their own name, but it sounds to me like you've had a very good reason not to.
Yes. I mean, some people actually write under a nom de plume because they want to write in a totally different genre. That wasn't the case for me. It was about protection.
Now, all of those years, and we're talking something like 3 decades, of being linked to this mind control cult, occult experience, ritual rape and torture, those things are incredibly difficult for a lot of people to even process.
Yeah.
And I don't want you to go into all sorts of details about that, except to say, what were the things when you said a Christian came into your life that led you to a point where you realised that what was happening was not normal, that it was fully dysfunctional and there was a better way?
Yes. So when I became a Christian, it wasn't long after the Lord led me to a man who was doing a prophetic ministry. Now, it was an amazing ministry. He was ahead of his times. You know, he wasn't embraced back then, but he would have been today because it wasn't usual back then. But through that, the Lord opened up this reality of my experiences. It shocked me to the core. Like, I literally went into shock for a whole day just trying to grapple with that. But from that point, the ministry started to open up a bit more. Then in that same year, the Lord led me to a counsellor, an amazing counsellor as well, who had been working in this area. And she had knowledge and experience. And I tested her out at first to make sure, was this safe? And she was. And then it was quite a long journey of it's like pulling apart a matrix, bit by bit by bit, all these different brainwashing stuff, let's call it.
Having a specialised counsellor when you're going through such turmoil in your life, that's going to be important, isn't it?
Yes.
Are you aware, and of course, you have this capacity to be able to talk to people about these things. Yes. Are there a lot of Christian counsellors is there a special, extra qualification you can have to actually understand some of these sorts of things with ritual abuse? How rare is it to be able to find the right counsellor?
Yeah, there actually aren't a lot out there. It's a very difficult area to work in because you're working with complex trauma, but you're working spiritually as well. So you're kind of crossing over a whole lot of things here. No, there's not special training. There isn't a qualification you get for it, and there aren't a lot out there. And they need to be, really understand trauma well. They need to be experienced in that, but they also really need to understand the spiritual side because this is a spiritual battle as well.
Over the years, I've come across all sorts of people who have been qualified by way of being a church authorised prayer counsellor when it came to some of these deeper, darker issues. And there's a new dimension too, of course, when you have some accreditation with some official counselling bodies as you do, which gives you some protections. And I guess to be able to open up your heart and say these things have happened, you want to be making sure that you're talking to the right person.
Oh, absolutely. The wrong person could re-traumatise you and actually send you back years. So it isn't really important. I believe absolutely, and that's what the Vortex is about. It shows that the counselling and the ministry go together. So get into a good, trustworthy ministry, people who know how to handle stuff like this, and a counsellor who also understands and knows how to work with this.
What about that Christian who came into your life and helped you see things differently? That
was the man who did the ministry, he particularly. So he's not, as far as I know, that the church was very kind of shut the doors on him. So he left that ministry, as far as I understand, which was a real shame.
Yeah, and so, when you're looking for people who are going to be, rock solid, they were there yesterday, they're there today, and they're going to be there tomorrow, you do want to find those sorts of people, because it's a little bit like, there's a pillar in the church, and others then can be able to get their bearings, to be able to navigate life, because there's someone that they can go to say, hey, all this stuff is just crazy. And so we might just go with a couple of comments that have come through before we move on. Brenda, a message from Leanna in Findlay in New South Wales. I love Christian fiction. I agree about the lack of Australian authors. I know a young Australian author called Jessica Kate, who has several books with a very Australian flavour. There's someone who understands exactly where you're coming from, and you say, well, there's a little bit of a stigma around being an Australian.
Yes, no, there shouldn't be, especially in Australia. I mean, the bookstores should be stocking Australian authors with Australian stories, because we have a unique kind of sense of humour and the way we think and things like that, and stuff that we put into our books is just that little bit different, say, to the American.
Okay, and you write about certainly a dark side, and in your book called Vortex, and we'll talk about your other book, Georgia, in a few moments. But another comment from Dee in Tasmania, who says, do you think Christians are very ignorant and perhaps unwilling to learn about satanic activities, perhaps even the spiritual gifts that assist in discerning and delivery work? What are your thoughts for Dee? Are we a little ignorant around some of these things?
I guess the short answer is yes, but I don't mean that to sound judgmental of Christians and churches. But this dark stuff can be pretty scary, and, there's a lot of dark stuff going on in the world as it is, and a lot of times we just don't want to see this. We don't want to know about it. But it's a very real thing, and there are a lot of children being hurt still today by this. And there's not any really good teaching around it. It's not spoken about from the pulpit. People don't really understand it.
Of course, in defence of the maybe not quite so ignorant, lots of pastors deal with a lot of these sorts of things, and in a certain level of confidentiality, and they can't talk about these things.
True.
Oftentimes reluctant to even speak about these things from the platform, but secretly doing the duck on the water, paddling very steadily and looking very serene. A lot of pastors do deal with these sorts of things, and some perhaps better than others. And that's where your new book that you haven't yet released about trauma is likely to be supportive of people who do this sort of ministry.
Yes, and really any trauma, but this as well, because it when people are manifesting in their trauma, and especially spiritually manifesting as well at times, it's very difficult to understand what is going on. It just looks like they're being disruptive in the church, but they're not really meaning to. It's their trauma coming out, and something has triggered them, and so they've reacted, or even spiritually reacted. I hope that makes sense. And knowing what to do with that is quite difficult in the moment, especially in the middle of a church service when you're trying to manage everything else.
That's right. And sometimes disruptive elements in church, if they're linked to trauma, then you hope that somehow or other there is either, a divine intervention from God, and oftentimes that's, where prayer is so important. Oftentimes that prayer line at the front of church is sometimes the first point of contact when people are going through an issue where they need special ministry. But yes, there are all these sorts of things, and it's quick to judge sometimes rather than being quick to be a little tolerant if there are some things that are out of line in church. Another comment from Julie, who says, "Hi Brenda, I've been looking for a Christian counsellor for a fair while now with no success. How and where do I go about getting in touch with a good, empathetic counsellor?" Okay,
so is it Does she say, is it for ritual abuse, or is it just
she's
generally?
just saying, just looking for a good counsellor, and my suspicion is that maybe there's some connection there, but who knows?
Okay.
The organisations that you are registered with, I guess
Yes.
they'd be a good start.
Yeah, no, they're a good start. The Christian Counsellors Association has got loads of counsellors. I personally know lots of counsellors. Some of them, unfortunately, have gone into retirement for different reasons, but there are still great counsellors out there. And it's always give them a call, see how you feel in that, in that conversation. Does it seem like you're connecting? Does it seem like they're understanding you? And if not, try somebody else.
Okay, so Christian Counsellors Association of Australia, that's
Yes.
where you're registered.
Yes.
And they'll have a website online. So
Yes.
for anyone wanting to connect with them, there's counsellors all over Australia. So there might be one close by, but certainly you'll be able to find someone you can connect with either on the telephone or on a
Yes.
face-to-face sort of meeting online. Psychology Today online?
That's really more of, well, yes, that's an advertising thing, but there are Christians on there. And even the Chaplaincy Australia, while that's about pastoral stuff, there are chaplains in that, but there are also some of those people are counsellors. So you could even have a little look through there.
Okay, so I'll mention those again at the end of our conversation. Hey, we talked about Vortex. That's the dark one. That's
Yes,
got your backstory that you've introduced and a way that you've come into contact with a Christian ministry, helped you through that. And we'll talk about, beyond that too, and what inspires you to write these sort of fiction books. But just quickly on your other book, Georgia, right. A loving aunt reignites her dream of being an artist by teaching her about art and the Lord and encourages her to embrace both. This one's not as dark as the other one.
No, this one's not dark, but it does have adversity and loss and grief and breakdown of a relationship, and then, but within that is the journey to salvation and hope, and God opens doors that no human could open, and achieving a dream, and it's all about that and beyond.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because we'll always say there's no substitute for the Bible and understanding God's plan of salvation, but oftentimes it's in people's stories, whether it's a testimony or in the case of someone who's writing a book, even though it's a fiction book, this way of just introducing people gently into an understanding of what the reality is. Is this what you try to do?
Yes. I mean, I love testimonies. I love hearing people's verbal testimonies. I find them inspiring. But also with fiction, you can, you've got a little bit more latitude. You can explore and kind of go places with a fictional character that maybe you might not in a non-fiction book. And so draws out some of those real life struggles that people go through. And as well as myself.
So when Georgia has an encounter with the Lord and opens her heart to him, her life suddenly moves in directions she could not have imagined.
Yes.
This is where, when you're writing these fictional accounts, you begin to introduce people into what is the possibility here? What are the ways that God leads you? Yes,
because often it's not what we think. It's not the direction necessarily we think to go in. So, she wants to become an artist. Now, it's not about being an artist. It's about having a dream that has been squashed down. And then you get to that place and then you come to the Lord, but then he starts to open some doors that you wouldn't have thought, I would go through that door, or is that even possible for me to get through that door? But he opens these doors and you go through them, and then he keeps opening more doors, and it keeps leading somewhere, depending on what his purpose and plan for you is. But this is a fictional story, and I've just created a journey where she gets to achieve her dream, but actually more than that, and the possibility of even greater success. But the point is only God can open those doors.
Okay, so some of Brenda is going to be in Georgia.
Yes.
But there's some scenarios that you've picked up over many years. Is there a particular scenario of getting led in that particular direction that you can think of for sharing with listeners around the sorts of things that, when you've come to Christ, There's been a ministry in the process. You've understood this dysfunction of your past, and you're wanting to get onto a new track and a new journey and a new aspiration for your future. What's the sort of thing that you come to with a scenario that we might identify with?
Well, usually, like, we all have some kind of a dream, or we have some desire for something. So we start somewhere on that pathway, and then we, often will have struggles or trying to figure out even, am I supposed to go that way? So I'm not sure if this is quite answering you, but that's how I was seeing it. So her dream was that, but she did start to do, say, the work of learning how to be an artist, and she had someone helping her, and then she got a tutor, let's say, and it's, that kind of. So she was sort of on that pathway, and so she was moving in that direction, and God was able to work in that with her to help her to get where she needed to go, and He wanted her to go.
Okay, some more comments here. Let me just reflect here. Let me see, just to qualify what Julie was saying. She was looking for a grief counsellor. So I imagine that going through those lines with those identified Christian counselling organisations, yes, you'll find some really good grief counselling there, and of course you could look for those online counsellors, but oftentimes your pastor is the best one to go to, because he'll have an identified number of counsellors that perhaps are within your community, and that's also another avenue to go. Comment from Rebecca in WA: I didn't even know Christian fiction was a thing. I have a teen who I think would like that. Would there be any suggestions for teen Christian fiction, and where can I find such books, please? Any thoughts here?
Obviously, my books are definitely not for a teen.
Yours is an adult book.
Yes. But, Kurong still has great books, even if they're not from Australian authors, but they're still great books. And I think, go to Kurong first, have a look at what they have. I don't know teen authors because I that's not my area.
Okay, no special recommendation for teen authors, but yes, those Christian booksellers online, and we've been mentioning Kurong. Check out Kurong. You can find them online. You can find out what sort of things that they'll have there for teen fiction, and you should be able to find a category like that, and you can explore those. And, there's no guarantees that what you're going to buy is excellent from anywhere.
Yeah,
so, you've got to be guided a little bit there and be ready for anything. Hey, Anita says, can you tell me the name of the book about ritual abuse, please? Okay, so we've been mentioning it. That's the one called Vortex. If you pick up Vortex, and this is the dark one, and it's substantial, it's primarily your story. For listeners, when they've read Vortex, are they going to be left with answers and hope to move forward? How do you describe the outcome of someone who's going to read the Vortex book?
Well, that was my hope in writing it, was that they would have, that the reader would see that there is an outcome, that there's a good outcome, because that is her journey. She does get healed. She goes through the process, and she has good people supporting her. And they're the elements of anyone going through trauma of any kind, is you need good support, you need good counselling, you might need deliverance, you need ministry. So in the end of the book, when you get there, without sort of giving away too much, that will be evident that it's come good for her.
Okay, interesting. Now you've raised the word deliverance, and
okay.
And it might be worth us having a brief chat about that, because some people will think, oh, that's just old hat. That's something from the past. I've heard about those sort of things, and I've heard about those movies that you can see with the priest and flicking holy water and all sorts of things like that. What does deliverance look like when you've gone through the sorts of things that you went through, say the, ritual abuse, and getting free from the controlling influence of a cult-like organisation that's been trying to hold you down and even suppress the secrets of the torturous things that they've done to you. Yeah. Deliverance, what sort of thing? I'm assuming here that you've been through some deliverance. Yes. How do you describe that?
For me, deliverance is, absolutely not the priest with the waving that stuff around. It just gives me the heebie-jeebies. Deliverance is getting with somebody who is experienced, connected in a church, somebody that you know has a good reputation, and there are people around. It's just a matter of asking. And like Jesus is the example. He said, "Be gone," basically, go. And you know, he was fairly gentle about it. Now, some people will they won't even necessarily notice anything immediately, but a week or two later they'll notice, oh wow, this is something different here. I'm not how I was before. But for some people, they will manifest, and this can be the little bit scary part from others who see this. You know, they may have a physical manifestation of this demonic stuff leaving them, and that's okay. If you've got a good ministry team there, they should be able to support them well. But that's when I also say put them into counselling as well. Give them the referrals for good counselling.
Would you say, and I mean this is a big topic and we've really only just started to scratch the surface here, but if you were feeling like you needed to have some level of deliverance, right, and we're talking about demonic spirits, and some people have doubts about those. We like to say that the Bible is an authoritative book and there's plenty of demonic deliverance in there.
Yes.
But when you are going through a level of deliverance, would you say that you ought to have a team who is a part of that rather than just an individual? What's the safest way, do you think, if you were approaching your local church, if you felt you needed some of this to actually get that process happening?
Yes. Well, it doesn't have to be lots of people, even just a couple. I think that's better to have two people, not just one, because sometimes crazy things do happen is when someone manifests, but also for safety for the person doing the ministry. You don't know sometimes what might happen, so they should be at least a pair or a few in the room. And because somebody, you know, like we all have different gifts. Someone gets something, someone gets a different insight, someone gets something else from the Holy Spirit, and so they're all working together. But ideally, if you're going to want that in your church, and there are some churches who absolutely don't have anything at all. They don't have counselling, they don't have, you know, any of this because they don't believe it. But go somewhere else. If it's not in your church, then find out where there is a good ministry and go there. Or if it's in a different church, go there for the ministry, is what I think. To my mind, getting free is far more important than, you know, ruffling a few feathers. And,
of course, I would always say to protect yourself in all of that, because that team or that, as you say, oftentimes it's a ministry couple that might be involved in that deliverance ministry. Just make sure that that's above board in the sense that they are not just someone who's in the car park who says, oh, I can do this.
Yes.
Make sure it's someone who has the imprimatur of your church, your denomination even, or certainly of your pastor to be able to lead through that, so that your pastor there is able to provide those sorts of safeguards and make sure that there's nothing happening which is really crazy. Because yes, all sorts of things can go wrong, and all sorts of things happen when you're dealing with the demonic realm, because the demonic realm is a lying spirit realm.
Yes, absolutely.
And all sorts of things can go wrong. So there's certainly going to be some level of caution required. But if you know that you need it, you need to seek it from somewhere. This is where I imagine that your own prayer life, if you believe that you need some deliverance, A, you could pray for that yourself, but B, you could ask for wisdom from God to lead you to the right people. How do you sort of see things moving along that way? You clearly had the right person that was able to lead you through all of your dark past.
Yes.
Getting the right person, as you say, that's not easy.
No, it's not. I actually went to a few different ministries, though, as I was led to over the years. So it wasn't just one person. And because sometimes you deal with something in 1 year, but down the track a little bit, something else will become evident and God will show you, then you need some more ministry for that or some more counselling for that. And that can happen over a period of time, especially if you've got a lot of trauma like me, like I had. But also, I just want to come back to something you said before. My hope is that pastors, if they don't actually have that sort of ministry in their church or any ministry, that they be willing to refer them to, say, another church that they know has a good reputation, say, or has that kind of ministry.
And you know what? So many pastors, priests and leaders are a part of ministers fraternals. And you know, they have wonderful contacts, even within your own community, that you will have no idea some of the issues some of the pastors need to deal with. Yeah. And so certainly broaching this with your pastor and getting some guidance there will be a wonderful start if you're going through these challenges.
Yeah. Hey, can I just interrupt and say one thing I did forget to put in my blurb that I gave you is that the Lord is now leading me to do pastoral supervision. So that is going to be part of my helping pastors to also understand more about this sort of thing and whatever they need.
Okay, that's fabulous. And for listeners, they might want to be in contact with you. Let me just mention, because time has run out, we've been talking with Brenda, and the books that she has written, she's written with a nom de plume. In other words, written under a pseudonym, and the pen name that she has used is Emma Linden Jones. Emma Linden Jones, ELJ, the initials, which is, if you're connecting with Brenda on her Instagram, ELJ_author to connect on Instagram. But you'll be able to go online and you'll be able to find that Emma Linden Jones name and connect that with the books that we're talking about today. The one that's got the dark history is called Vortex. The other one, which is light and easy, is called Georgia. Her latest book is One But Many, A House of Secrets, which says, the little blurb says, Helena wondered if life in the house would ever change and they would all get along. But even with their differences, they needed each other to survive. That might be enough for listeners to go on. We didn't get a lot of chance to unpack a lot of detail about your latest book, One But Many, A House of Secrets. And the other one we mentioned is a new book that's coming out shortly, all about facing trauma. And as you say, Brenda, there's a need there for people in church life to be able to know how to handle these things when and if they arise. And so to connect with Brenda, ELJ_author on Instagram. That's the best connecting point.
Yes. But also, if they need to contact me as a counsellor, well, of course, you've given them the details there.
Yes, and so you can connect with Brenda through the Christian Counsellors Association of Australia. Let's go with that one because that'll have a listing of counsellors, and if you're looking for a counsellor in your neck of the woods, that might be a great place to start too. Brenda, thank you so much. I didn't know that our conversation would go in the direction that it has today, but I think that listeners will be enlightened that there are these sorts of dimensions to our hearts and our lives, and look forward to maybe a catch-up another day soon. Brenda, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much. I've loved being here.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.